stay in the light, yeah. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? I'm speaking right in the microphone. Okay. Well, I just want to start by saying that one thing that always bores me is listening to other people talking. So I have to reckon you might be bored listening to me. To try and avoid that, I'd like to invite you, any of you, while I speak, to stick up your hand, and if I don't see it, shout, so you can interrupt me any old time rather than wait till the end to ask questions. In my youth, I used to speak on Hyde Park Corner just for fun, so I'm used to that sort of thing. And it's much easier to let things go with a swing. Now, the reason we're here is because of the outrageous way in which children are treated in this country, and the way that forced adoption, which means adoption of children against the will of the parents, is carried on. And only in the UK, in Europe, is this allowed. It's possible in Portugal, but nobody's quite sure about that. But every other country, they do not have forced adoption. They might take children, but they don't adopt them against the will of the parents. So in a nutshell, what is the worst feature? And there are a lot of very bad features, which I'll go into. But the worst feature of what happens in this country with regard to children is that newborn babies can be taken from their mothers at birth, and hundreds are every week, as the Daily Telegraph wrote, for example. Hundreds are for risk of emotional abuse. That doesn't mean that they have been emotionally abused, because they've only just been born. And who knows what emotional abuse means, because I don't believe there's a person in this room, not one single one, that hasn't suffered emotional abuse. And I don't believe there's one person who hasn't emotionally abused somebody. You let somebody down, they let you down. That's life. It's called living. Anyway, risk of emotional abuse is just a forecast. So newborn babies are taken for risk of emotional abuse. They are then given by a compliant rubber-stamping judge to strangers for adoption. The adoption is closed, so the mother doesn't know where the child has gone, and if she tries to find out, if she goes public and gives her own name, what happens? She's put in jail. Harriet Harman admitted that over 200 such parents are put in jail every year, and she didn't have the exact figures. She was sure there were more than 200, and she was Minister of Children at the time, and she said they were put in jail in proceedings of complete secrecy, and she was worried about it, but not so worried that she did anything about it. And so therefore, again, in a nutshell, newborn babies taken for risk of emotional abuse, adopted by strangers, and mothers are jailed if they protest. That, in one sort of sentence or two, is the worst feature. But there are several terrible things that happen. Everybody has individual cases, but if you go to social workers, social services, and you say, can you explain why this happened? Why was this baby taken? Because neither parent has been charged with any crime. The answer will be, we can't discuss individual cases. For a start, that's a lie, because if the parents give them permission, they can discuss them. But even so, they should therefore be able to discuss generalities, which is what I'm doing at this moment. Because generally speaking, why should the only courts in the country be secret? The family courts. Now, the terrible error which opponents like myself make when they call for the opening up of the family courts, it's an error to do that, because the reply always is, well, would you like all your family affairs put about in public? They ask that question to a lot of children, and of course they get the answer, no, we wouldn't. But if instead of that, they ask the question, if a child is taken from its mother, do you think the mother should be jailed for revealing her name and protesting? And they'd certainly answer no to that. Therefore, I invite you, if you do protest, Don't go around saying the courts should be open. They should be, but it doesn't get you anywhere. What you should say is, for goodness sake, remove the gag. It's against human rights to gag somebody when something wrong has happened to them. In a democracy, if you have been wronged by the government or believe you have been, you should be allowed to protest. I think that parents in this position should be like rape victims. Now, if a woman has been raped, she is entitled to privacy and no one can say her name, and I think that's right. But quite frequently, if she wants to tell her story to try and stop it happening to other people, like I think the vicar's wife a long time ago, it happened to her, she's telling her story. And I think that therefore, parents should be the ones who decide whether they want to tell their story and say who they are and what happened to them. And if they don't, they don't. But at present, it's not that they have the choice. If they dare, they are put in prison for contempt of court, while somebody who coshes an old lady and takes her last £10 note probably gets 3 months community service. There have been several cases. I mean, there was one where a woman had her baby taken, so the next contact, she put it in the car and headed for Heathrow Airport in despair, where she was caught. 1.5 years in jail she was sentenced to for that. She never harmed anybody. She only tried to take her own baby. But I don't want to go into too many individual cases, because the thing is to get some sort of reforms, and also to ask, why is this happening? Well, and what the heck am I doing? Who am I to interfere in all this? Those are sort of 3 questions. I'll start with the last one. There are an awful lot of lunatics with sites on the internet saying all sorts of things, and the only way that I can try and distinguish myself from my site, which is forcedadoption.com, is to say that I quote the Telegraph and the Times and even the Daily Mail extensively, so that if I'm a lunatic, all those distinguished journalists are lunatics as well. Now, how did I get into this? Why should I be standing up here talking to you? The social services have never done me any harm. Called me a few names, said that, you know, I should be suppressed, put in prison, all the rest of it, but they've never done me any harm. Well, I'll tell you, but if it bores you, shout out and tell me to get on to something else. I was on Kent County Council back in 1960, believe it or not, to 66. I was never really a conservative, but they came and asked me as a businessman who had a language school in Ramsgate that, you know, we need somebody, and I said, well, as long as I can vote how I like, okay. Well, apart from many times when I didn't vote the way they asked at all, along came a woman who lived only a few streets away from me, and whether she voted for me or against me is unimportant. She asked for help because her son Trevor, I think 11 or 12 years old he was, had a genius level almost IQ, about 160, and he was too clever at school, so he got bullied and he was bored, so he played hooky from school, and suddenly he was taken from her, and they wouldn't tell her where he was. This is back in the 60s. And things were not nearly so bad then. There was no secrecy in the courts, there was no forced adoption, but they still took him away. So I asked the children's department, I said, well, if you won't tell the mother where he is, tell me in confidence so I can visit him and assure her that he is safe and all right. And they said, no, mind your own business. I said, well, I'm a counsellor representing her. You mind your own business, you're not on the children's committee. So I put down a motion that I should be allowed to see him in full council in front of all the journalists who were there. It got defeated 105 votes to 1, so all 3 parties didn't like what I was doing. But the papers put it on the front page of the Sunday Express and other papers, and I was allowed to go and see him. I found Trevor, whose first question was, why doesn't my mother write to me if she cares? I said, she writes every day. Why don't you write to her? He said, I do write every day. I said, well, what is this special school? He said, well, it's owned by Otto Shaw. He's dead now, so I can't libel him. But it would be truthful anyway, because he was the deputy leader of the Labour group on the council. And the fees being paid were 3 times those of Eton or Harrow. So he was doing all right. And I said, what's this school like? He says, it's terrible. We don't learn anything. He said, the only good thing about this school is the money. I said, what do you mean? He said, we get very well paid when we sleep with one of the masters. And that was the best thing he could find to say about the school. Well, in those days, I was allowed to appear for people, because I've got a law degree, but I'm not a qualified solicitor or barrister or anything like that. I just have that degree. And in those days, the parents could ask any person they liked to, who they trusted, to apply for the discharge of a care order on a child. So it went to court, and he got back to his mother, and then lots of mothers asked me to help, and I appeared up and down the country, and without blowing my own trumpet too much, I never lost a case. I got all sorts of kids back, appearing against my own counsel, which didn't make me best popular with my colleagues, actually. And anyway, the trouble was that I spent so much time doing that, that my school began to suffer in Ramsgate, my language school, and I felt my family broke up. My first wife went, you know, I was too much concentrating on that. So after 6 years, I stopped. I gave up completely. I went and concentrated on keeping my family and my school. I married again, had 5 more kids. I married a French girl, moved out, left this country, went to Monte Carlo, where I am now, Monaco, started a language school there, which has been successful. And then about 4 years ago, I read in the Daily Mail, I think it was, about Professor Meadows and Munchausen syndrome, which didn't exist, of course, when I was active in the council, and his ridiculous figures about cot death. If it happens twice, multiply the figures together, and it's 70 million to 1, when in fact, of course, genetically, it's more likely than not that cot death will occur in the same family. And so I wrote a letter and said, it sounds even worse now than when I was on. Well, as a result of that letter, I got about 40 or 50 people writing via the mail to me, and now the situation is different. I'm not Bill Gates, but I'm in a comfortable sort of position with my business in Monaco, and so I began to concentrate again, built a website. I get 1 or 2 new calls every day, nearly, at least 1 a day. That's more than 300 a year, plus following all the old ones up. I must have had a few thousand people, and the only way I can advise you, and I will advise anybody, because even if the parents are at fault, everyone deserves to be advised, even wrongly, sometimes if it's by me. But anyway, I will advise anyone, but I just say, that's the situation, tell me the facts, that is what I think you should do, and then forget about it till they ring me again, and then they tell me the facts again in the new situation, if the situation's changed. So that's how I got into it. Now, why has it happened? Why has it evolved the way it has? A judge will often say to parents in court, they'll say to a poor mother who wants her child back, do you really think that we in the state are in a conspiracy to take your child? So you say, yes, it seems like it, and it sounds like she's off her head, or they try and make it like that. Well, I'll tell you, there is no conspiracy. There's no need. Everybody is on a nice little earner, which is built up by itself, the way that bureaucracies do. It begins small. So, I mean, for example, the fosterers, and there's some very good foster parents, but a lot of fosterers are very reluctant to see the children go back to the parents. Why? Because they get paid, there's an advert in the paper somebody sent me just now, for $20,000 a year per child. You've got 5 children you take in as fosterers, you've got $100,000 a year, tax-free, because most of it, because it's an allowance. Yeah. Most of it. And so therefore, I'm not against foster parents. There are some very good ones. What about the social workers themselves? Well, they get stars and promotions if they reach their adoption targets. Agreed, up till 2 years ago, there were millions of pounds, which I listed on my website, given to the councils for fulfilling their adoption targets. There was such a fuss about this, adopting people just to get the money, that the targets were abolished officially, the money target. But the targets still exist. The instruction from Tony Blair, the Prime Minister at the time, to increase adoptions by 40% in so much time, that still exists, and they still go for adoptions. And you may say, well, these social workers, they believe what they're doing is the right thing. I think they do. Most of them, they do think that what they're doing is the right thing. But then I honestly believe that the camp guards at Auschwitz and Buchenwald, they thought they were doing the right thing. They bloody weren't, of course, but they thought they'd been indoctrinated, and it's the same way with social workers. They think that when they take children away, that they can make better arrangements than the parents for looking after them. And therefore, you know, they do all right. The barristers, well, I was telling someone I was talking to just before this talk that I was waiting outside in the corridor in the Royal Courts of Justice, helping somebody, and the court case before ours ran on. So we had to wait about 5 hours before it was free. We were waiting 4 or 5 hours in the corridors and looking for sandwiches and that. And I spoke to one of these barristers in his wig and everything and said, does this happen often? He said, yes, happens all the time. I said, don't you get sick of waiting in corridors and wasting your time? He said, no, not at £500 an hour, I don't. And I said, my God, is that what you get when you're not even speaking or doing anything? He said, yes. He said, but my colleague over there, that lady, she's a QC. I'm just a barrister. She's a QC. She gets £2,000 an hour. So when they say that they're short of funds, well, you can take that with a pinch of salt. So they do very nicely, the judges do very nicely, and then, of course, the adoption agencies do very nicely. Lots of ex-social workers set up. There's an article which I reproduced in the Evening Standard where, you know, some of them, they paid themselves a salary of £1 million for the year, you know, and they get £20,000 or 18,000, I think is the figure, for arranging each adoption, and most of the adoptions go through an agency. So they do very nicely. So it's a lot of people sort of doing very nicely on their own, but they don't have to conspire together. It's all sort of built up. And the judges, of course, why do the judges always side with social services? Well, they will always prefer the evidence of social services to those of the parents. Even when the evidence, for example, is from an anonymous phone call, and they are told by the police that somebody heard the lady say that she was going to tie her baby up in a bag and throw it in the sea, and she denies it. She was there, and she denies it, but the anonymous phone call is taken in preference, because only in the family courts is hearsay admitted. In other words, evidence from somebody who doesn't have to go to court and be questioned. And therefore, that's another reason for a lot of the injustices. Okay, well, what about baby P? Yes?
Does all the money just come from central government to pay for all these? It's not from the actual money to pay the barristers. Where's all the money actually coming?
Well, it comes from the local authority, and the local authority, of course, get their money from central government. But each local authority has a budget. Yes?
I'd like to know why, when parents have their children taken off them, that if they get a solicitor or a barrister, the first question they must ask any solicitor or barrister, if they're under legal aid, is, do you work for the council or have any dealings with the council? If they do, they're a conflict of interest. So that is the first question I personally would advise any parent to ask, because they'll find that the council will pay the solicitor or the barrister more money than you will get on legal aid.
Yes.
That's something I came across just lately.
Well, in fact, of course, as I say on my site, the family lawyers are, you know, in cahoots with the local authority because they get a lot of work from them. And even if they are not working with that local authority, if they're working for another local authority, they don't want to fall foul of them. Therefore, but other barristers, believe me, they're known in the trade, the family court barristers, they're known as professional losers because they always lose. They are told by, they tell the parents, go along with social services. You can't fight them. If you go along with everything they say, everything will be all right. That is the worst advice anyone can make. Yes?
I've got a comparison for you. You used to talk about looking after children. Now, yeah, thank you. Hello, yeah. Talking about looking after children and the difference in the pay structure for the court of one thing or another. Carers who give up full-time jobs to care full-time have to prove they do a 35 hours care to get the cares allowance. I know a family, just before he retired, he was paid £48. He looked after an 8-year-old, sorry.
Just slightly away from you.
Yeah, should he?
Well, I think I've got to deal with that. It's okay, we can pick it up.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so for providing 35 hours care, this guy gave up a full-time job. He was paid £48 a week. When his wife died, the youngster was 8 years old, and the other fellow who has Down syndrome was 28. The Down syndrome man is now 45, and the one's 25. When that guy retired, that £48 which was paid was taken off, and he got paid his old age pension. And I know this family very well. It's me.
Yeah. So your point being that not all carers are overpaid, right? Well, that's true. That's true. They're not all, but you can see these adverts at £400 a week. He was unlucky if he only got 48.
No.
Sorry, at the back there.
I'm sorry.
I'd just like to make a point about what the lady said. My advice to anybody is to travel at least 50 miles away from where they actually live and seek legal aid or legal advice. Their preference to be anywhere within 25 miles of the local authorities of where they're actually living.
Well, I agree with that, but I want to now give some indication to any of you who might be concerned how you should proceed if you're in a court case. The best thing you can do is to represent yourself because you know your case. Not everybody can do that, but you're allowed to bring a Mackenzie friend who can help you. Strictly speaking, a Mackenzie friend is not allowed to speak, but it's quite often the judges will allow him to speak because any barrister or solicitor, time and again, they will tell the parent, don't worry, you don't even have to come to court. Or if you do come to court, we'll speak for you. So don't be nervous, you won't have to speak. And they find that they've done a deal with the other side and you've lost your child without being allowed to say a word. Therefore, if you do have a solicitor or barrister, or well, you would have both normally, for goodness sake, sack them if they don't promise to ask one simple question to you. And that is this. Please ask me in court, as a witness under oath, please ask me, have you anything you would like to say to the court? So that opens the door, at least for the parents, to say what's on their mind, to point out the inconsistencies, if there are any, in the social worker's case. But a barrister who says, no, you're not allowed to talk, should be sacked immediately. And you can sack them straight away, even in the court itself. You're not obliged to put up with that. Yes?
What you're talking about here, we didn't know about it at the beginning. We're talking here in retrospect of what has happened.
Well, that's why I'm telling you now, in case any of you run into it in the future.
Anonymous poor people have already suffered from SS.
Yeah.
We refer to them as the SS in future.
Yeah, they are referred to as the SS on my site consistently, I promise you. Yes, there, lady in orange.
If you do sack your solicitor, well, they're really difficult to sack because I tried that with mine and he was still claiming legal aid a year later.
You have to download Form N36. On my site, it shows you, and send a copy of that recorded delivery to the solicitor and to the courts, and he's out. Won't get any more. Yeah?
Can I just ask
Yes.
a question? When you say we should represent ourselves in court, isn't there a problem with the law itself in the sense of capital letter fiction? And we have to...
I can't see who's asking the question. Sorry. Oh, okay, right.
Isn't there a problem with the law itself and capital letter fiction so that we mustn't give the courts authority over us? And I'm a bit confused of how, you know what I mean, don't you?
Yeah, there's nothing to stop you representing yourself, whatever. The point is this, you're called a litigant in person, and that is specifically allowed for in British law and the law in most other countries. Now, if you were arguing about a libel case, a tax case, a fraud case, or a criminal case, you'd be a bit lost. You'd have to know all about previous cases and all the rest of it. But as all the cases in family law are secret anyway, you know, you don't really have to know anything about law. You have to show that you are a good mum and that anyone else would be worse and shouldn't have your children. Well, that is not something that you need to know much legal stuff about. Yes, back.
You kindly start saying fathers as well, because a lot of people that are married, they are married to bad women. and the fathers then will want custody. But because they're legally married, it is harder, and it doesn't matter how bad the mother is. The children always go to the other side of the family. Now, we've also got another law that's coming. It's called special guardianship.
Yeah.
And the special guardianship is actually worse than adoption, worse than fostering, and worse than putting children into care.
Yes, I agree that, of course, fathers are just as much concerned as mothers. The only basic difference between the father and mother is it's the mother who actually gives birth. That doesn't mean that she's always the right person. But I can't get involved in custody disputes as well because I can't meet the father, the mother, and work anything out. What I do get involved in is when children are taken. And of course, if a baby's taken at birth, it's taken from the mother because the mother's lying in bed there and the father isn't, you know, because they take it when the father's away. But I mean, I'm not anti-father. I'm one myself. I've got 7 kids, 2 by first marriage, 5 by second. And we only wanted 4, but the last 2 were twins, and I couldn't put one back. But there we are. So I mean, as a father, I'm very much, you know, I sympathise with the father's rights, and you know, when they climb up in Batman's mask and all the rest, I think they're justified. But nevertheless, it's principally mothers that I help because it's the cases I get most involved in are when just after the child's born, when it's a baby. When these experts make a prediction, they say, not you have harmed your child, but we think that one day you will harm your child. That's like arresting somebody looking in a shop window saying, I think you're going to go inside and pinch something. It's the same thing, you know, and so I get more involved with mothers, and it's more often that mothers write to me, but it's not, if a father phones me, it's just the same attention from me as a mother, I assure you.
And the other thing is, as soon as anybody loses a case in the court, they have the right to appeal there and then.
Exact.
And that is what we're just finding out now. But we find, I grew up in care. I helped Bruce Arnold write the Irish Gulag. So I spent 11 years doing child abuse, the child law. I sent you some stuff on the questionnaire. But I cannot understand in this day and age, if parents are so bad to have their children kidnap them, why no parents are getting charged. So they're getting charged with crime by losing their children without actually committing a crime.
This is completely true. I mean, this is why we're on the platform we are now. They are not charged with crimes. Most of the children who are taken, they're not. You see, what about, I've been waiting for somebody to say, but they haven't, what about Baby P? What about Victoria Climby? What about that child who was starved to death? What about poor social workers who say, damned if we do and damned if we don't? Well, the answer to that is this. When a child is physically abused, what happens? It's generally drunken or drugged up parents who are very intimidated. In Baby P's case, the boyfriend had a couple of Rottweilers there as well as himself. Well, the social workers get intimidated, they don't go near them. Such a baby as Baby P is not fit for adoption anyway. They don't want physically abused children because nobody wants to adopt them. They want nice, bright, blue-eyed, blonde children, preferably, who are suitable for adoption and they can meet their targets. Therefore, they concentrate very much, and this is why I help probably more mothers than fathers, on single mothers, because they're more vulnerable. If they do have a partner, the social workers do their best to split them up. They'll say you have to have 2 separate solicitors, and then the 2 solicitors slang each other instead of slanging the social services. So this is the terrible thing about it, that they are damned if they leave physically injured children to die, and they are damned for taking children they should never have taken in the first place because nobody's committed any crime against them. You can't imagine, for example, that Baby P's mother, if it had been taken, would have gone to court crying, saying, give me my darling baby back. She wouldn't have gone near a court, neither would he. Such people who ill-treat children in this way don't go near courts. The sort of parents who go to the family courts are parents who are desperate, who love their children in general and want to get them back. They wouldn't go through grueling cross-examination from nasty barristers acting for the social services if they didn't really love their children and want them back. Therefore, it's reasonable, any reasonable person would think, well, surely most of these people are justified and most of them should win. You know, not all of them, but 80 or 90% surely. In fact, it's the reverse. Probably 99% lose. The only ones that ever win that I know about are the ones who represent themselves. And that's why, you know, even if you know nothing about the law, well, you know, animals look after their young. They don't need instructions. Yes, at the back.
I'd like to make the point, sorry, I'm fed up of social workers saying that they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't.
That's just what I said, yeah.
Isn't that the same for parents going to a family court? You're damned if you cooperate and you're damned if you don't. They will take your children anyway. And for those that aren't aware of the forced adoption industry, I just want to make the point that some of these children are removed. There's been one case before the mother's even delivered the placenta.
That's right, in Scotland, yeah.
And also, while the baby was still in the birthing pool, and what's important is these children are being denied their basic human rights to breast milk.
Yeah, and they are, this is another thing, you know, but the trouble is, as you say, people don't know till it's happened to them. You're quite right about breastfeeding. Judge Mumby, who's one of the more humane judges, ruled very firmly that every mother was entitled to breastfeed until she'd been charged with a crime at least. And they disregard that. You see, they disregard any laws they want, and they're allowed to do so. Now, I hate criticism without proposing solutions, so, but I saw some hand go up. Yeah.
My niece is in the process of adopting a child, and so what I'd like to know is, they're hoping to adopt a 3 or 4-year-old. How do we know about the background of that child? How would she know? Would she be told the truth about the background of that child?
Well, the word truth and the word social worker don't go very well together, I'm afraid. You know, in their training, if you talk to a friendly one, they are taught to lie. They are taught to lie for the good of the child. They believe they are lying for the good of the child, so they probably won't tell you. Now, I think adoption, let me be quite clear, is a wonderful thing, providing it is completely and truthfully voluntary. But I think it's a dreadful crime if it's not. Certainly a closed adoption where nobody knows where the child's going or whether it's alive or dead for the rest of its life. Now, in your case, I think you've got to say, can I meet the birth parents? And then you can ask them, are you quite happy for me to adopt your child? That's what I would advise you to do. Yes, the man up there, yeah.
Neil from Preston. I was labouring under the misapprehension, maybe, that the majority of children stolen go into or are taken into care homes. What proportion of children are taken into care homes as opposed to being fostered?
A smaller proportion. I don't know the exact percentages. I've probably got it in my book somewhere. But care homes, as such, are generally for the ones that run away from the fosterers and go back to their parents, so they put them in confined spaces, these care homes, such as the one that I talked about earlier. There is the case on my... I'll come to you in a minute, but I must tell you about the case. I don't want to discuss too many individual cases because you get bogged down and hard cases make hard law. But of Becky, which was on television, and this girl was put into a children's home and ruled by 2 or 3 social workers, and she, her mother was, they threatened to kill her mother unless she went out and worked as a prostitute every afternoon. And she was abused by 25 middle-aged pedophiles. They were the ones that threatened to kill her mother if she didn't do what they wanted. And the social workers said it was her human right to go out every afternoon as long as she came back to where she was. They had no right to... She was 14 years old, by the way, so she was breaking the law every time she did something. And she didn't even want to. She said, can't you help me get out of this and protect my mother? But they weren't interested. This was on television. But it's an important case, not because of the dreadfulness of it, but it's important because if this girl had the human right to go out and work as a prostitute every afternoon, then surely another girl would have the right to go out and see her parents in the afternoon, even if she was in a care home. But often when they do that, they're brought back in handcuffs because they didn't work as a prostitute. They only went to see their parents. Yes, the man with the hat.
I'd just like to make a point about the children that they were kidnapped and stolen and sent to the colonies in the 1940s, 50s and 60s. There was over 100,000 children. And it was very contentious in Australia, and very, very contentious in Canada and New Zealand. And I met one of the victims in a pub in Oxford about 10 years ago. And he spoke at length about what happened to himself, and it was shocking what happened to them. A lot of them were treated like slaves, a lot of them were sexually abused and raped as well. And this is all in the colonies. And this particular chap, he had an A4 size sheet of paper, he was going like this: I'm not blaming the British government, I'm not blaming the British people, I'm not even blaming the Queen of England. I said, thank you very much for that, sir. And then,
Well,
he just seemed to walk out of the pub. He's actually writing a book about it. It's very, very contentious about what happened to these children in Australia. I think the government in Australia recently finally got round to apologising to them. And even Gordon Brown, I think, got up and apologised about it.
I think he said he would, but I don't know if he actually did it. But I mean, it's very easy to apologise for the slave trade. Well, none of us were alive when it happened, so I don't feel the slightest bit responsible for it. So don't need the need to apologise. I just say it was a dreadful thing. But child trafficking is as old as time.
That's what they were doing.
Yeah. Well, it was, yeah. Sorry, the man there.
You just mentioned the slave trade.
Yeah.
The slave trade hasn't finished.
No, it's...
Wait, just a minute. You've got the sex slave trade now.
Yeah.
You mentioned that these kids being sent out at 14 years of age. It's still happening, so for goodness sakes, I mean, yeah.
Oh, yes, it's...
I'm sitting here, it's really, I'm welling up. I mean, I didn't know 3 parts of what you're talking about.
No, well, it's...
I thought my situation was bad enough, but crikey me.
Oh, yes. No, I mean, it's still there. It's under a different guise, that's all. But now, yes, the lady there.
Jean Robbins, Association
Yes.
for Improvements in Return to
Yes,
Democracy.
yes, I know you.
This is not, a huge amount of this is not about child protection. I remember talking to a drug worker who deals with pregnant women and said they are not taking the babies who are born addicted. They're taking, they don't want those, they're taking the ones whose mothers have got off drugs, and we had just such a case. So it's about acquiring the right kind of kids for the adoption market. And incidentally, I'm an adoptive mother, as well as a mother of homegrown, as it were, and if we had, this was a child that the mother planned to be adopted, wanted to be adopted during pregnancy, but I thought we had acquired our wonderful child in the way I have seen children taking, I would not sleep at night. It's like Argentina. And I spoke to a woman who came from a Holocaust family, and she said, in Europe, and she said, what they are doing is redistributive eugenics. And one of the things about the Munchausen by proxy stuff, which they then dropped and moved on to personality disorder when Munchausen by proxy became too hot for the courts to take on, is that it enabled them to acquire nice middle-class children whose mothers have been very well fed, well educated, good IQ, and so on and so forth. But of course it had the benefit to us of bringing in a lot of very well educated, well connected families who would then put up a much better fight than people who did not have the level of education and social connection. But don't believe this is about protecting children. Just look, we have a department of children, schools, and families. What comes at the end of the list? Families. Who mentions parents? No. There is a minister for children, schools, and families. And what they say, and this is a big con, we are now listening to children's voices.
Well, thank you. That's this association of which Jean Robinson is there, does terrific work, and thank you very much for your contribution and the work you've done. I've seen you on this morning, I think, in television, and good luck to you, and we're working for the same thing and from different directions. The lady at the back, then I want to talk about reform.
I would just like to tell everybody that I've got several rattled after my name. It's not because I've studied several degrees. It's because I've had that many diagnoses through the family courts. And I've been diagnosed as having borderline personality disorder, emotionally unstable personality disorder, bipolar disorder, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, adjustment disorder, and acute stress disorder, and the latest one is premenstrual syndrome.
Well, I'm not surprised. Let me tell you that social workers and their acolytes and these so-called experts, which I didn't mention, but who also coin it like mad, get £4,000 or £5,000 for a report, very often without even visiting the person they're reporting. Social workers think they're such wonderful, devoted, caring people that anyone who doesn't like them must have a personality disorder. So that means half the room, I think. Certainly includes me. But everybody, maybe. So I want to say this, though. You know, I run a business, and if my staff say something's wrong, I say, yeah, well, how do you think we should do it if we're doing it wrong? And the same thing comes here. So I want to go now as to what are the possible remedies to this situation? What are the practical remedies? What should we really demand? And the most important thing of all to me is this, that if a mother is going to be, or a father, is going to be separated permanently from her child or his child, I think that this case, this decision should be made by a jury, not by a judge. Because the judges, this one change would probably cure 90% of the problems, because a jury would never take a baby away for risk of emotional abuse or risk of anything. They'd want to see that the parent had committed some crime, had done something bad to the child before they even thought about it. It's been told, well, a jury wouldn't understand. A jury is for civil cases, is not for civil cases, it should be criminal. Well, that's not true. They decide complicated libel cases and tax cases and things like that. Of course they could do it. All right, there's several cases, and the jury couldn't be sitting on all of them, but the final care order, the final decision, whether a child should be taken from his parents or not, should be a decision by jury. And yesterday I was talking to Sir Paul, what's his name, forgot to say, of the jury team. Anyway, at his flat looking over the embankment. And he's very much for juries on everything and referendums, and he agreed that this one simple reform would do an awful lot. The second reform, of course, is to remove the gag. Now, I say again and again, the terrible mistake that a lot of you people make when you're crying out for reform is to say, open up the courts, open up the courts, open the family courts. And you get the retort, do you really think families should have all their private affairs put over in public? It's the wrong cry, open up the courts. What you should say is, in a democracy, remove the gag from parents. Don't put the gag in their mouth and arrest them and jail them if they talk. Like I said at the beginning, it's a diversion to say open the courts because it's too easy for them to reply. These are confidential matters, the children can suffer. Well, as I said right at the beginning, and I'm repeating it again, parents should be like rape victims. They should have privacy if they want it, but they should not be jailed if they open their mouths and say what happened in the court. This is the second big reform. Yeah?
I personally wouldn't have...
Sorry, where's my book that I had on there?
In my business, my business being made public, as I've actually got nothing to hide. Social services, courts, judges, etc. They don't want it out in public because these people obviously have got something to hide.
Well, exactly. I mean, the way that family courts proceed, you know, is a disgrace. Their people are completely railroaded. They are discouraged from calling witnesses. Time and again, the barristers and solicitors will tell a parent after their child's been taken, the parent will say, can I appeal? No, it's impossible for you to appeal. They are told time and time again, and it's a direct lie. Those lawyers would be struck off because there is no court in the land, no lower court, no court of first instance from which an appeal does not exist. That's what an appeal court's for. Yes, at the back.
I'd just like to say about the lady over here, she's already pregnant, and if she's got so many letters after her name, I would advise her to have her baby at home with people that she could really trust, or go to another part of the country to have it, because they're obviously going to come and take it away from her.
You've almost got there, but I would advise people to... Yeah, well done. But I have advised many parents to actually leave the country. I've helped them, you know. In certain circumstances, I've refunded their travel expenses to Ireland, where you don't need a passport, or to North Cyprus, where even if you've robbed a bank, they can't get at you.
Ireland is starting to bring the children back. I sent a letter on to Teresa Cooper's website. They've now got an agreement. And you will need a passport if you go on the plane, and they're bringing passports in for the ships as well. I know, because we were on a demonstration a fortnight ago over in Ireland.
Well, so far, any parent that I've helped has managed to get over, not on a plane, of course, on the ferry. And I haven't had one turn back yet, and I've helped quite a few to get there. I mean, it's not safe. If you go to Ireland, you must go before any court proceedings have been issued. Otherwise, under the Hague Convention, they can take the child back. Yes, the lady over there.
Oh, thanks. This happened to a woman who took her children to France. And one day, she'd lived there for, I think, about 2 years, and there was a knock on the door, and the French social services were there, and they said, we want to speak to you, we'll look after the children while you come with us. She went with them, and when she got back, there were no children there, and the British social services had been over and taken them away.
Well, I don't know that story, but...
Brian knows it, I'm sure he knows it.
I mean, under the Hague Convention, if you take a child illegally from Britain to any other European country, that other country is obliged to return the child sooner or later, even if it is 2 years later. So maybe that's what happened. And I'm not saying that's a good thing, I'm just saying what the law is. But that's why, if you're going to take a child illegally, go to North Cyprus. If you're going to take them legally, then you're safe enough in Ireland. Yeah. Or France. Or Spain.
Can I just say, I've got a disabled son, so it's a slightly different situation, but I've been fighting social services for over 16 years. I live in Cambridgeshire.
Yeah.
One thing that I'm going through the courts, and I've had solicitors just completely side with council and everything really horrendous. But one thing that we've decided to do is a very, very small group of us, mainly single parents actually, but what we've decided to do is start an organisation which we call Disability Action, and the social services authorities don't know who actually belongs to it because we have an administrator. And what we've decided to do is say to people, if you want meetings, give us a ring and we'll do the meetings on Skype and be there, and we write to social services saying, if you would like to come, you're most welcome to, but please be informed that all meetings will be recorded and monitored for training purposes.
Yeah.
Get another fresh social worker in who doesn't know the situation, so you say the same thing to them, you know. So if we in this room could maybe, you know, get an organisation and at least have 1 or 2 people, you know, in the room with us by hook or by crook, any means necessary, those social workers are going to start to get really, really worried.
Yeah, I just want to get on to then how to deal with social workers, and you've got to think first. Now, is a social worker who is threatening to take your child your friend or your enemy? Well, most people will say they are enemy. Therefore, you must look at them as your enemy. Therefore, when they tell you to do something, you must be very polite, very friendly with them, and then apologize for not doing whatever it is they ask you to do. Because anything they do ask you to do is not designed to help you. It is designed to help them win their case against you. What they want to do once proceedings are started is to win their case. No, they're not interested in the child. They want to win, because if they did lose, it would be a pretty black mark. Therefore, when lawyers say, go along, be assessed for this, be assessed for that, well, my advice is, if you're going to have an assessment, look on my site and get some assessor who's parent assessor or psychiatrist who's friendly to parents, or someone who's recommended by somebody else. But remember that social workers, and this is difficult for people who've never met them until they get into trouble to believe, the thing is, they have no authority over you whatever. Please remember this. If they say this, we've got to do this, you've got to do this, we're taking your child, they have no authority. If I told any of you to go outside and sing God Save the Queen in the street, you wouldn't do it. You'd think I was a loony. Well, you know, that they have no more authority over you than I have, but people tend to just sort of think, oh, we must do what we're told. And the terrible thing is that by going along with social services, you get assessed by somebody who regularly appears in court for social services and is expected to give an adverse report on the parents. If they don't give an adverse report on the parents, they don't get any work again. Yes, the gentleman with the beard there.
I think I'll be all right. There is a movement at the moment called Lawful Rebellion, and one of the things we've noticed is that police forces, the courts, the councils, they're all listed as commercial corporations under Dun & Bradstreet. Now, there is, somebody briefly mentioned this idea, there's a difference between corporate law, otherwise statute law, and common law. Now, this is very much work ongoing, but I would imagine that if you stand under common law jurisdiction, you can tell them, who are there under statute law, basically, to politely go away, I'm not entering into your jurisdiction. Now, there's a lot we've got to do as regards research here, but I do believe that this might be a key to help.
The trouble is, you know, that what the law is, and then what happens, how they administrate it, is a different thing. Now, I do want to, before I take any more questions, just go into this, how things need to be reformed, because I've only got as far as two. One is, the most important, is to have a jury. No, any burglar who faces 6 months imprisonment can demand trial by a jury, but a family can't, and they can lose their child forever. The second thing, like I said, is of course that the gag should be removed in a democratic country. You shouldn't be jailed for revealing your own name and speaking about your own grievances. Those are the two most important things. But there are other things. For a start, children should not be taken away for risk, because who can assess the risk? I've been told, if you say that, do you really want to wait until a child breaks its leg before we take it? Well, yes, I think you do, because otherwise you're just guessing, you know, like gypsies with crystal balls. We think this family is going to harm the child, and often it's quite a different family that harms the child. Yeah, at the back. Okay. Sorry, what was the question?
How many gypsy children have ever been taken?
Well, they steer clear. Funnily enough, the answer to that is that I had a mother who was married to a gypsy, and the police said to her, we're coming for your child, and please don't let us come to a gypsy camp, or we won't be able to do it, you know. Well, and she asked, what should I do? I said, go to the gypsy camp and stay there, you know. And that is the case, but I mustn't take any more questions, because I've got 5 minutes to go.
One more thing, just one more thing. I just want to question that grieves me so much. How did a system that was set up to do good do so much evil that all these people are here? Tell me that.
It's the law of unintended consequences. You know, laws get passed for one thing and have a completely opposite effect. And when people are out for their careers, any bureaucracy grows and grows. It takes more and more power, and that's what happened with social services. But I do want to get onto the things that need reforming.
Yeah. Because we've got a communist government in charge of this country, and they've been implementing a communist agenda for the last 50 years.
Well, Well, in some ways, I wouldn't go as far as that, because we do have elections with two parties agreed, but they are, as far as this goes, they're all the same. Unfortunately, I mean, I try and raise the issue, and we have one or two members of Parliament who do seek reform: John Hemming, Tim Yeo, Eric Pickles, but those are on individual cases. They don't go to the broader reforms needed. You see, another thing that is completely wrong is hearsay evidence. You know, hearsay evidence. Somebody says anonymously that woman mistreated her child. Well, you know, that is not enough to have the child taken. Well, usually that by itself isn't enough, but it reinforces some other evidence, and it should never be entertained. If it's not entertained in the normal criminal courts or any other court, then hearsay evidence should be banned completely. Also, I think that any parent who doesn't have confidence in their barristers and solicitors, and that is generally very much justified, should be able to ask a friend to plead their case on their behalf officially. A Mackenzie friend is not supposed to speak unless given permission by the judge. They're supposed to give notes and advise. And I used to, in the 60s, as I said, I went up and down the country appearing because I was allowed to do so, and I never lost a case against my own Kent County Council when I was a member of it. But I found it, you know, fairly easy to do, frankly. But now, all I can do is sometimes be a Mackenzie friend, and even in the last case I was at, the QC appearing for the wife, and I was the Mackenzie friend for the husband, made such a fuss when she saw me that she said, your child will be adopted if Ian Joseph is there, and the mother panicked and said, well, can you sit at the back? So I did, and the QC then, it was a case in the Telegraph, Christopher Booker reported it, they then slanged the poor father and didn't make a case for the mother at all, and her child of 7 years old is down for adoption. Luckily, she's too old, I think, to be adopted. But it was in the Telegraph. Neither parent has ever been accused of laying a finger on them. They were dog breeders, and the RSPCA rushed in and let the stud dogs out, and it tore the little girl's pet dog to pieces in front of her. They handcuffed the parents because they were swearing and shouting at the people. 30 police burst in at the behest of a teacher, apparently, who had reported them because they'd reported her for something. And these things happen. But the basic reforms necessary are, as I say, you know, remove the gag, bring the jury, stop the hearsay, stop taking children just for what somebody thinks might be a risk. And then forced adoption itself is wrong. You know, no matter what, parents should at least know where their children have gone. They should know whether they're alive or dead. At the moment, forced adoption is closed adoption also, which means that you don't know who's got your children. They may be a lot worse than the parents, and frequently are. But when they're reported for ill-treating children, the police generally don't take any notice. They'll take a mother who's slapped her child in exasperation and a small bruise is there, and then that child's put with first with foster parents and then maybe with adoptive parents, and whatever the injury is, if the mother reports it, she's just being told she's making trouble and she's making it up because she was cross because her child was taken, and that's a terrible thing. Yes, lady in the white there.
Is there any protection at all from the European Court of Human Rights in this issue?
Unfortunately, it takes a long time. So when there's adoption, the case of PC&S against the United Kingdom, the baby was taken at birth from a mother who had never been accused of any crime, who had been in America, got out of an unfortunate marriage there where the husband was abusive, married again in England, and as soon as she had a baby with a new father, it was taken. That went to the European courts. The UK was found guilty of abuse of human rights and was fined quite a large amount, but they couldn't upset the adoption, which had already gone through. They take so long that and once an adoption is through, no one can upset it at all. Unfortunately, it just can't be done.
Surely there's some sort of laws for the people of the country for the right to family or the right to, you know, certain things. Surely the laws in this country should be questioned by the European Court of Human Rights.
They should.
Because they're inhumane.
They should be indeed, but the bureaucracy is mighty slow. I mean, everybody has the right under various articles of the human rights, I think it's 8, to an undisturbed family life, but they make the excuse that that it's necessary to disturb them for the good of the child, etc., etc. We have freedom of speech, and yet this is the other thing I didn't touch on, and I must mention. Another reform is necessary, is that when a child is taken and the parents have access to that child, they should not be censored and told what they can say and what they can't say. At the moment, the parents nearly always have to sign an undertaking that when they have contact with the child, they are not allowed to mention the fact that they love them and miss them, and certainly not the matter, and certainly not that they're fighting in court to get them back. So the child is often told, your mother doesn't love you anymore. One case I had even was that the child was told, your mother has a new baby, she doesn't need you. You know, terrible things. Yeah.
So how do we bring about the change?
How do we bring about the change? You have to persuade the politicians, and this is there's only one way. You can't do it without passing new laws. I wish you could. But if you just had those two things, the two crucial things, and the other reforms would follow, the juries would never take children away for the same reason. The judges, some of them, even the good judges, and there aren't very many of them, they're frightened to overrule social services in case something goes wrong and they're castigated. A jury is not worried by such things, and removing the gag. Yes, there. Okay, last question. This lady there.
Just like to say that there are many levels on which our children are being abused and basically tortured and emotionally tortured. And it can go right the way down to you know, the poisoning that's going on through the guise of helping and protecting, like the vaccinations, and also mercury that actually releases in dental fillings and passes down generations, and then that results in the most horrendous depression, illness, disability, and often suicide, cancers, you name it. I've got some, which happened to my daughter in 1993, so in a way I've had my daughter taken away from me, but slightly different circumstances. But I've been at health research for 7 years now, because we have to get in our own power here. And I've got some sheets by Albert's T-shirts, if I can do a little plug for the T-shirts now. But, yeah. And what they have, it's a self-empowerment website compilation that I've come across over the past few years. I keep adding to them. Yeah. And at the top is about the laws of the land and the corporate laws.
Well, I'm sure those who are interested will contact you in the lunch hour, because I've been told I've got to wind up now. But they'll
get together on this.
Yeah, I mean, they're fantastic work. But I do want to just talk about this contact, because contact is so important. And freedom of speech is supposed to be part of our democracy, and yet parents are censored, the thought police, you know. And the other thing is that in the courts, parents are told, just as they used to be in Russia under Stalin's era, you confess what you've done, and then we'll treat you sympathetically. You admit to something, even if you haven't done it, do it just to please the judge, the lawyers will say, and then you'll get, and of course if they are foolish enough to admit it, then they're really lost. But freedom of speech, so that if you can't tell your child, I love you and miss you, if you can't tell your child, we're trying to get you back in the court, so that other people can tell the child, your mother can't look after you anymore, she's ill, that's the best thing they say. The worst is she doesn't love you and doesn't want you anymore, and they can't counter it. So, but freedom of speech, even though it's in the Human Rights Act, is not enforced in the country. So I just want to wind up by saying that my site is www.forcedadoption. It's easy to remember. My name's Ian Josephs, and if you Google my name, it comes up. I give free advice to anybody. I never take a penny off anybody. If any newspaper offers me money, they goes to the family that it concerns. I will help those people who genuinely have cases to escape to other countries. I will sometimes refund all or part of their travel expenses at my own expense. I'm not Bill Gates, but these small amounts I can do. And I do it when they've got there. So anybody who does want to contact me, forcedadoption.com, or Ian Joseph's, my email is ian@monaco.mc. So there it is, and anyone I can help, I will. And that's all. Sorry, just the last thing?
I should like what you told about Stalin, yes? I from this country. I was small girl when Stalin died.
Yeah.
But I listened what my parents told about Stalin and other people. Not was like this. If you write complaint, simple people write complaint to Stalin, very quickly take steps and punish government and everything.
The last point I'd like to make too is that some people who want to sound reasonable say, this is the last point I make, say, well, some social workers do, a lot of social workers do wonderful work. There's only a few bad apples. Well, that sounds good, but the point is this, that if you belong to an organization doing such terrible things to people, and you stay in that organization past your one-year contract, and you don't get out, and you don't protest, then you become part of that organization. How many nice people belong to the Ku Klux Klan? How many nice people belong to the Gestapo, the KGB, the Spanish Inquisition? You know, those sort of bodies, if you join them by mistake and you keep in them and you don't protest at what they're doing, you're just as bad. So I would say no social worker in child protection who stays there for more than a year without protesting is worth their salt.
Because people feel like slaves, you understand? You don't feel freedom. You don't feel freedom.
Well, that's correct. You don't feel freedom. Well, this lady comes from...
People don't know their right, what they can do, what they can't do, because not law.
You're quite correct, and you know, this idea of confess and then all will be well, that is hideous, and it's only fairly recent, you know, that it's come in the last 10 years or so, and it's borrowed straight from Russia, unfortunately,
and
you know.
What happened in this court, Royal Court of Justice, this is terrible, what I can see, because I myself study law, and the judge said, we think she from Soviet Union, she's stupid, but she very good understand British law, and she can write letter to government. I said, I don't know English law, I don't know law my country, and same like England, but here make very terrible.
Well, you're quite right, and I have to wind up to give other people a chance to speak. Thank you. But in one sentence, I would say this, that the law should say, but it doesn't say, the law should say that no parent should be punished if they have not committed a crime. As simple as that. Thank you.